you could be forgiven for, if you're listening on Global Player, you could be forgiven for exercising the rewind function at this point and double-checking the date, because we're about to talk about Conservative Party difficulties caused by their dedication to and obsession with deporting refugees and asylum seekers to Rwanda. How many times has that been at the top of the news agenda? And it makes next to no sense. In fact, I think it might have reached peak madness yesterday. Not so much with the resignation of honest Bob Jenrick, which was inconvenient for the Prime Minister, but the prioritisation of personal ambition over anything that remotely resembles principle or party loyalty has been baked into this generation of Tories since they allowed Boris Johnson to become leader. Could you imagine if a Conservative popped up on the telly and gave you the impression that he cared more about your life than he did about improving his own position or advancing his own ambitions? You'd probably think you were tripping or hallucinating or some such. But so that is where we are. And indeed, the idea that a minister best known for helping a former pornographer with a property deal that had previously been stymied by local authorities, and of course ordering that a processing centre for unaccompanied child refugees be made even less welcoming than it was already. That's honest Bob's legacy right there. The idea that losing a minister like that from your government could be perceived as perilous or bad for a prime minister is a mark of just how completely bonkers everything has become. But here's the bit that I really don't get. Here's the bit that I really don't, or rather I get it, but I can't quite believe it, I think is what I would say. I can't quite believe it. The bit that boils everything down to these brass tacks. The deal, right, it's already cost us 140 million quid or more. Plus, as Peter Gagan has discovered on his rather excellent Substack account, we've spent about another 2 or 3 million on fighting the courts, fighting the legal battles in this ridiculous situation. And I think what happened yesterday, and you know, you can tell from my voice, can't you, that I'm not 100% sure about saying this out loud, because I'm 90% confident I've understood exactly what's going on, largely as a consequence of Rishi Sunak's letter, response to honest Bob Jenrick. I think that Rwanda now holds us to account on the rule of law, on the international rule of law. Rishi Sunak told Conservative MPs that the Rwanda deal would collapse if he acted outside international law. I think this is really important. I am, as ever, minded to ask, what the hell do you do if you still think you're a Tory, if you still think this lot are worth voting for? How do you hold it together now? I presume you just turn it off and watch Nigel in the Jungle or something, do you? I can't. What do you just have a quick look in Idiot's Corner? Okay, here's Ed. O'Brien won't be satisfied until there is a UK socialist state in perpetuity. He should move to North Korea. These people, they don't just have a vote. They're allowed to operate scissors, unsupervised. I guess that's what you are now. If you see yourself, I'm conservative till I die, and you have to somehow muster up loyalty to and support for these absolute clown cars, you just end up in a position of utter gibberish, utter and undiluted gibberish. I mention that because I'm always interested in working out who the hell is still, according to the opinion polls, minded to vote for these people. But what happened yesterday was absolutely extraordinary. And I think I overuse the boiled frog analogy, but I think that we're so conditioned to the madness now. We're so sort of gaslit by the absurdity of the political situation or the catastrophic, the chaotic nature of a political system or successive governments built entirely on lies, embellishments and cults of personality, that we sometimes don't really notice the latest explosion of absurdity. Rishi Sunak had to tell his own MPs yesterday that if he does what they want with regard to Rwanda, then Rwanda, an administration that still tortures and kidnaps political opponents and which ordered the shooting to death of refugees protesting about food rations just 3 or 4 years ago. That Rwanda there, Paul Kagame's Rwanda, right? If Rishi Sunak does what backbenchers like Mark Francois and now honest Bob Jenrick and Suella Braverman, if Rishi Sunak does what they want, Rwanda will call time on this deal. Rwanda will uphold international law in the face of calls by conservative backbenchers to abandon it. Do you know what? I'm on until 1. It's mystery hour at 12. I don't like to interfere with mystery hour. I'm tempted not to say anything else. It's 10 past 10. This disgusting policy, which even if you have sufficient moral depravity to approve of, you have to acknowledge is logistically dumb, is now under threat from the Rwandan government's insistence that the UK drops any plans it might have had to abandon international law in order to send people to a country that under our own laws, under our own judiciary, under our own judicial system, under British judges for British people, is adjudged to be unsafe. Absolutely incredible. And yet I think it's fair to say that we are so used now to this madness that the latest evidence of madness goes almost unremarked, or it does not go fully recognised and fully understood. So I am going to say it again, because I wonder how many people listening to this programme are fully cognizant of what I am describing. You have a policy designed to address a tiny, tiny fraction of a perceived problem with immigration numbers, right? And because the Conservative Party have closed down all safe routes for asylum seekers and refugees making their way to this country, they have been, if you like, forced into the hands of people traffickers and human smugglers, forced into these so-called small boats crossing the English Channel, right? So they created this problem single-handedly. This problem did not exist before this government came into power. It did not exist before Brexit. The small boats problem is a creation of callous policy designed to stop people coming here safely. So they then set themselves the challenge of stopping people coming here unsafely, while obviously expressing not a single scintilla of sympathy for the people actually imperiling their lives in the boats. They care so little for those humans that honest Bob Jenrick ordered the removal of murals rendering a welcome centre for unaccompanied child refugees even less welcoming than it was already. These are the people of whom we speak. So it's a problem entirely of their own making. The Rwanda issue will address a tiny, tiny proportion of this perceived problem. It is simultaneously being argued that it's absolutely fine to send people to Rwanda and they'll have a lovely time, but also that it's so awful that the prospect of being sent to Rwanda will deter people from trying to get to the UK in the first place via perilous means that they only have recourse to because the Tories have closed down all the safe routes, the safe, end quotes, legal, end quotes, routes. So the Rwanda idea has been inflated to unfeasible proportions. Suella Braverman, probably the most obviously disgusting politician of our lifetimes, and please God, that's not an invitation to somebody else to challenge her for the title. Suella Braverman boasts about dreaming of front pages describing the deportation of genuine refugees to a country where refugees get shot. And somehow Rishi Sunak's government has got itself into a place where the Rwandan government is now saying to Rishi Sunak that if you dance to Suella Braverman's tune, if you do the bidding of honest Bob Jenrick, if you accommodate the sick fantasies of Marc Francois, then we, the Rwandan government, the one that kidnaps and tortures political opponents, we will pull the plug on this deal because we don't want to be party to your breaches of international law. And you will turn your telly on or your radio on later today and you'll hear someone talking to a member of the government who I honestly don't think even understands the seriousness of what that situation describes. So caught up are they in their client journalism or their desperate attempts to reflect both sides and be balanced and impartial? They don't actually realise what we have become. A country being told by the Rwandan government that if our Conservative Prime Minister does the bidding of Conservative backbenchers like Marc Francois and Jacob Rees-Mogg, Robert Jenrick and Suella Braverman, then they, the Rwandan government, with £140 million of our money in their pocket in return for precisely zero, they will call time on the whole six scheme because they don't want to be party to our breaches of international law. There's a slim possibility my analysis is wrong. 03456060973 is the number you need if you want to tell me how it is or where it is or why it is. But what I really want to hear from you is your explanation, stroke opinion, but explanation is a more useful word, I think, in this context. I want to hear your explanation of how this happened. How did we end up? How did the British government, how did the UK government end up in a place where the Prime Minister has to tell his own MPs that if he does what they want, then Rwanda will pull out of a deal to take asylum seekers from this country? It is absolutely extraordinary. And then factor in the numbers. Factor in the fact that even if it worked, you're looking at about 200 a year from an overall total, not just of people who make their way here by boats, but of people which would, I think, put you at about 45,755 in 2022. It's lower this year, but you're looking at can you do these sums? Do you remember how to do these sums? You put 200 over 27,284. That's the number this year as of the 13th of November. So you can cross off, 200 over, so a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of the number of people making their way via this route. You want to count the number of people that have made their way here in total, then it's an even tinier fraction. It doesn't even touch the sides of the purported problem. And they've bet the whole flipping house on it, the entire house now. Rishi Sunak giving a press conference at 11 o'clock, which is sure to be about this. It's sure to be about this. How the hell has this happened? How have they ended up in a place where the Rwandan government now has managed to assume the moral high ground with the UK government? People are only just discovering that the traffic is going to be two ways anyway. Refugees will be making their way to the UK from Rwanda. If somebody commits a crime in Rwanda, even if this stupid scheme works, which it won't, they will get sent back to the UK. If we were to pull out of the European Convention on Human Rights, the Good Friday Agreement would blow up in our faces, something that I heard Natasha Clark explaining earlier today, one of the few political journalists in the country who's bothered to lay out those simple and unavoidable facts. I tell you now, you follow Irish media, they can't believe they're, even after all these years of rubbing their eyes at the madness being inflicted on the population on this side of the Irish Sea, they still can't believe that the absolutely inextricable role that the ECHR plays in the Belfast, in the Good Friday Agreement, has completely passed by everyone at the Telegraph or the Times or the Daily Mail. It's breathtaking. But ultimately, the thing doesn't even seem to be popular. Remember, the Question Time audience was asked if they were in favour of it, and no one put their hand up, even Question Time, where the audience is deliberately selected to be supportive of the Conservative government because they fill the seats according to how votes were cast in 2019 when Boris Johnson came out with an 80-seat majority. So take a moment now. We're going to go to a break, a junction, whatever you prefer, a hiatus. And then come back and tell me how the Conservative Party in general and Rishi Sunak in particular got themselves into this mess. How did Rishi Sunak get himself into this mess? This mess here, this Rwanda-shaped mess. How did it happen?